The prairie woke slow, the way a wounded thing does, with light crawling over ridges of rock and dust. Goats shifted restless in their pen, their breath steaming against the cold, and hens scuffled near the sagging fence, their claws scratching out hunger before the day began. A man moved among them without hurry, boots sinking into earth that had been broken too many times. His hands, wide and scar-mapped, spilled grain like ritual. The animals pressed close, trusting him as if he were the only truth left in a land that lied. He had made himself small in the world. A low roof leaned against the wind at the edge of the valley, patched with tin and prayer. Smoke rose from its crooked chimney in the evenings, only enough to show he was alive, but not enough to invite company. The village half a mile east spoke of him, as though he were a story told after sundown, half caution, half superstition. Children dared each other to creep near his fence, then fled shrieking when a goat bleated too loud. Men in the saloon spat tobacco and muttered about deserters, killers, or worse. Women whispered that some scars can't be hidden, even when the body wears silence like armor. He rarely crossed into their world, and when he did, the air shifted around him. He would come for salt or nails, maybe a coil of rope, and the room would draw taut, every glance sharp as barbed wire. He spoke only what was needed, eyes lowered, and left before suspicion found voice. The sheriff once remarked, almost kindly, that a man who keeps to himself deserves to be left that way. But the others weren't so sure. Secrets, after all, were dangerous currency. The land itself treated him no gentler. Summer baked the soil until it cracked like old lips. Winter blew its hunger straight through the walls. Coyotes sang nightly, sharp and mocking, daring him to lose one of his animals. But he held on. He built fence after fence, dug posts deep into the stubborn ground, patched the coop until it resembled a fortress. To the outside eye, it was a small, pitiful kingdom. To him, it was survival. Evenings brought the hardest silence. When the goats lay chewing in the dark and the hens huddled into feathery lumps, the man would sit on the stoop, rifle across his knees, and watch the sky burn out into black. Memories tried to creep in with the night winds, but he clenched his jaw and refused them. He told himself the past was buried under the soil he tilled, yet sometimes the earth seemed to whisper otherwise. One morning, after the first hard frost, he noticed tracks along the far ridge. Not deer, not goat, hoof marks heavy and hurried, with a drag of boots alongside. He crouched low, pressing a hand against the indentation, and felt the echo of movement still warm in the dirt. Whoever was had passed close. Too close. The valley wasn't a place people stumbled into. If riders came this way, it meant purpose. That evening he found something else. While splitting wood near the fence line, his axe struck something solid in the ground. He dug with his hands until he lifted a small object from the dirt, worn smooth with age. It was a carved figure, little more than splintered wood, but shaped by careful hands. Child's play once, long ago. He stared at it as if it might catch fire in his palm. His chest tightened, breath shallow, and before he realized it, he was burying again, shoving the soil over it with quick, violent motions. His goats pressed against the fence, watching, and he turned away from their eyes. The next day in the village, he heard the whispers sharper than before. A woman had seen strangers at the well, she said. Men with hard eyes, asking after routes, after names. Others spoke of smoke seen in the northern hills. Raiders maybe, or men chasing debt. The saloon filled with unease, voices lower than usual. He left before they could tangle him in their fear, but the words followed him out into the wind. Back at his land, the sky was the color of bruised steel, storm clouds crouching heavy on the horizon. He stood among his animals, feeding them, mending a loose plank, but his mind refused stillness. He thought of those tracks, of the object buried in the soil, of the villagers' restless talk. The valley had been quiet for too long, and quiet in these parts was never a gift. It was the breath held before a strike. That night, as the storm broke open and rain whipped the tin roof, he sat inside by a wavering lamp. The rifle leaned against the wall, cleaned and ready. The goats bleated soft in their shelter. The hens rustled against straw. Yet he felt no peace. He felt the land watching him, same as the people watched him in the village, waiting for him to reveal what he truly was. When the lamp guttered low, he whispered into the darkness a truth no one would hear. The past does not stay buried, no matter how deep the soil. Something was coming, and when it reached his valley, silence alone would not protect him. And still, when dawn cracked pale and weary over the hills, he rose again, spilled grain from his scarred hands, and fed the goats and hens as though the act itself could keep the world from breaking. But the world was already moving toward him, hoofbeats carrying nearer each day. He could feel it, and the land could too. The goats were restless long before he saw them. Their bleating carried sharp across the valley, not the hungry sound of mourning, but something closer to warning. He rose from the stoop, rifle in hand, and scanned the ridgeline. The rain from the night before had left the earth dark and slick, and along the edge of his land figures moved with a stumbling weariness. At first he thought raiders, the kind who rode fast and struck hard, but these shapes did not ride. They crawled. By the time they reached his fence, he saw there were 3 of them, a woman, her face tight with exhaustion, a child clinging to her skirts, and behind them a man too far gone to stand without leaning against the posts. They were dusted with travel, their clothes torn, their eyes hollow. He kept the rifle raised, though his grip was steady more from habit than threat. The woman lifted her chin, though her body trembled, and asked for food. Not money, not shelter. Food. He weighed the silence. Strangers meant trouble. Trouble drew more of its kind. Yet the child's gaze, wide, unblinking, fastened on the chicken scratching the dirt, pulled at something he thought long dead. He opened the gate without a word and motioned them inside. In his cabin, the air thick with wood smoke and damp wool, he set a pot to boil. The stranger sat near the wall. The woman braced against it as though she feared her legs might give. The man slumped into a heap, half asleep, leaving the woman to speak. She offered no name, and he didn't ask. She explained little, only that they had been moving for days, chased by hunger and shadows. Her voice cracked when she mentioned the child, but she steadied herself quickly, unwilling to show weakness. He ladled stew into wooden bowls, thick with beans and the last of the salted meat. The child ate as though each bite might vanish, if not seized fast enough. The woman ate slower, her eyes always on him, measuring, distrusting. He had seen that look before, in battlefields and in towns too broken to trust kindness. He did not return it. Instead, he ate in silence, letting the sound of spoons against bowls speak for all of them. Later, when the fire sank low, the woman spoke again. Their journey had not been chance. They were fleeing men who had claimed land not theirs, men who carried rifles and a hunger for more. She said they had seen villages burned, families scattered. She spoke like someone who had lost too much to waste words on pity. The child pressed close to her side, eyes heavy with sleep, and the man behind them muttered in fever, lost to dreams or nightmares. He listened, jaw set. He knew well enough the kind of men she described. He had worn their faces once. He had ridden in dust and smoke, taken what was not his, left behind a kind of silence that still followed him at night. He wanted no part of it again, but he knew the trouble she carried would not stop at her heels. It would drag itself straight into his valley. The next morning, the villagers learned of the visitors. Word spread as fast as wildfire. By noon, whispers swirled in the saloon, thin as knife edges. Outsiders meant risk. Outsiders meant raiders close behind. A man spat into the sawdust and said the farmer was a fool for harboring them. Another muttered that misfortune always followed a cursed soul, and now it would follow them all. The sheriff alone kept his voice calm, reminding the room that fear never won a fight before it was begun. But even he could not silence the unease that swelled with every word. Back at the farm, the child ran among the goats, laughter sharp and sudden, a sound the land had not carried in years. The man watched from the stoop, the corner of his mouth almost softening before he caught himself. The goats, unbothered by history or fear, accepted the child as if he had always belonged. The hens clucked at his heels, and he reached down to scatter feed with a delight that made even the man's scar heart stir. But the woman never relaxed. She watched the ridges the way a hawk watches the horizon, shoulders always braced. One evening, as the sun bled into the dirt, she approached him where he was mending a fence. Her voice was low, steady, but urgent. She told him their pursuers would not stop. She told him the village was in danger because of her. He asked nothing in return, no details of who she was or why they hunted her. The weight in her words was enough. That night, The valley felt changed. The wind carried unease. The earth seemed taut underfoot, and even the animals grew restless in their pens. He sat with a rifle across his knees, listening to the soft breaths of the strangers sleeping inside, and he understood that the silence he had clung to for so long was already broken. Trouble had crossed his fence and shared his fire. To send it away now would not erase it. When dawn rose gray and reluctant, the child stepped out into the yard, clutching a feather from one of the hens. He looked up at the man and said nothing, only held out the feather like an offering. The man took it, rough fingers closing over the fragile quill, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of choice pressing hard upon him. He had lived to avoid the world, but the world had come regardless, and it looked at him now through the eyes of a child who had found laughter among his goats. He stood still for a long time, the feather trembling in his hand, the wind curling around them both. Beyond the ridges, the land was stirring, and he knew the storm the woman had spoken of was drawing near. The valley would not remain untouched, and neither would he. Rain softened the valley for a handful of days, laying down a sheen of green across the hard soil, coaxing shoots where there had been only dust. For the first time in months, the land breathed, and so did he. The child trailed him from pen to pen, mimicking his movements with solemn concentration, spilling grain for the hens, carrying a pail of water that sloshed down his legs, setting his face into an imitation of sternness when the goats nudged too close. The woman watched from the stoop, arms crossed, suspicion in her eyes slowly loosening into something gentler, though never quite trust. He allowed the boy's presence, though he never invited it. Something in the child's laughter unsettled him. It carved through the silence he had built his life upon, reminding him of another time, another voice. At night, when the boy slept curled against his mother, he found himself staring into the fire, fighting memories that pressed at the edges of his mind. He had buried them deep, but children had a way of digging where the earth was weakest. On the 5th day, smoke rose on the horizon, thin at first, then thickening into a bruise of black against the sky. He saw it while repairing the roof, hammer poised midair, heart lurching like a startled horse. Raiders, he thought, or worse. The woman saw it too. Her face went pale, her lips pressing into a line that told him she had known this moment was coming. She said nothing, but her hand went instinctively to the child's shoulder, drawing him close. By evening, gunshots echoed faint from beyond the ridges. Not near enough to see, but near enough to feel. The goats huddled close to the fences. The hens jittered in their roost. The valley was no longer breathing. Now it was holding its breath. The village stirred with fear. In the saloon, voices rose, arguments sharp enough to cut the air. Some demanded the sheriff ride out and meet the raiders with show of force. Others argued for barricades, or even abandoning the town altogether. But the loudest voices turned their anger elsewhere, toward him. Outsiders had come to his land. Outsiders who carried shadows behind them. The trouble, they said, had not been far until he chose to shelter it. He felt their stares when he stepped into town for supplies. Men who had once only muttered now spat words outright. Fool, curse, coward. Women pulled children close, as if his presence alone might bring ruin down upon them. The sheriff stopped him outside the general store, hand resting light on the grip of his holster. Not a threat, but a warning. The man told him trouble was circling, and that he should think carefully about where he stood when it reached the valley. He gave no reply, only tipped his hat low and walked back the road. The weight of eyes followed him all the way home. That night the woman broke her silence. As the fire cracked, she told him the truth in pieces, as though each word carried weight enough to crush her. The men chasing them weren't common raiders. They were hired hands of a wealthy claimant who wanted her land, a swath of earth with water enough to feed cattle and gold rumored in the riverbed. Her family had been driven from it, her husband killed in the struggle. She had fled with her son, the only piece left to her. The paper proving her right to the land was hidden, tucked away, though she did not say where. The men would not stop until it was theirs, and until she was nothing more than a memory. He listened without shifting, though inside every word struck hard. He had known men like that. He had ridden with them once, taken land that was not his, burned homes that stood in the way. He had told himself he was done with that world, yet here it was, crawling back to his doorstep. His silence stretched so long the woman began to shake, as though she feared he might cast him out then and there. But he did not. Instead, he rose, checked the rifle leaning by the wall, and began to clean it. The next days passed like hours. Smoke thickened on the horizon, gunfire sometimes nearer, sometimes fading like thunder circling. The boy still laughed at the goats, but his laughter had an edge of nervousness now, as though he sensed a storm coming. The woman slept little, eyes always flicking to the door at night, and the man felt his own restlessness building, a familiar itch his blood he had buried long ago, the pull toward violence, toward settling things the way men like him had always settled them. One evening, he stood outside as the sun bled out over the ridge, the air heavy with waiting. The woman came to stand beside him. She said she would leave if her presence brought danger to his valley. He looked at her, at the boy playing in the dust with a goat's rib bone like it was a toy, and something unspoken passed between them. He told her leaving would not change what was coming. Trouble had already found its way to him, and the land was too hungry to let go once it had caught the scent. That night, coyotes cried louder than usual, their voices layered with the crack of distant rifles. He loaded the rifle with slow precision, laid extra rounds on the table, and watched the woman wrap the boy in blankets. The man who had arrived with them, the one half dead on his fence days ago, had faded entirely, his breath shallow, his strength gone. The woman tended him still, though her eyes said she had already begun to grieve. The cabin walls felt thinner with each passing hour. The fire threw shadows long and restless. Every creak of wood, every stir of wind outside set nerves taut. He remembered the tracks he had found in the soil weeks before, the carved figure buried under the dirt. The way the land had whispered of what was coming. It had not lied. The storm was here, only waiting for the right moment to break. Just before dawn, he stepped out into the yard. The valley was shrouded in gray mist, the silence so deep it made his ears ring. Then, faint but certain, he heard it. The drum of hooves far off, steady, growing. He stood there until the woman joined him, her face pale, her arms wrapped tight around herself. The boy clung to her skirts, still half asleep. She didn't ask what he heard. She knew. He turned his gaze to the ridge, to the horizon bruised with smoke, and tightened his grip on the rifle. The quiet life he had built, the silence he had guarded, had ended. Now the land demanded something else of him. Whether it was redemption or ruin, he could not yet say. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, but edged with something that had not been there before. He told the woman to keep the boy inside, to bar the door when the riders came. She looked at him as if she wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat. The boy tugged at her hand, asking nothing, only sensing the weight in the air. The hoofbeats were closer now, rolling across the valley like thunder, breaking the silence he had lived by for years. He lifted the rifle, the mist curling around him, and waited for the storm to crest the ridge. The valley had chosen its hour, and he would meet it standing. The first rider broke through the mist like a shadow given muscle and speed, rifle glinting in the half-light. Then came the rest, a dozen at least, dust rising behind them, as though the valley itself recoiled from their coming. He steadied his rifle against the fence post, breath measured, eyes cold. The goats scattered, bleating frantic, hens screeched in the coop, feathers bursting into the air. The storm had arrived, and the land made no attempt to soften its violence. His first shot cracked the silence, echoing across the ridges. One rider toppled from the saddle, rolling hard into the dirt. The others answered with a scatter of gunfire, bullets whipping splinters from the posts, tearing clumps of soil into the air. The woman pulled the boy into the cabin, the door slamming shut behind them. He stood alone in the yard, smoke curling from his rifle, heart steady in a way it had not been in years. The riders spread, circling like wolves, their leader at the center. A scarred face, cruel eyes, a man who carried violence as though it were birthright. He called out, voice carrying through the chaos, demanding the woman and the child. Promises of mercy laced the words, but even from a distance the lie rang clear. He did not answer. Instead, he reloaded with practiced rhythm, eyes fixed, body braced. Gunfire erupted again. He moved quick, diving behind a trough, firing through gaps in the fence, each shot deliberate. Two more fell, horses shrieking as they bucked and bolted. The rest pressed harder, shouting, their fury louder than the storm. A bullet grazed his shoulder, hot pain tearing through flesh, but he gritted against it. He had felt worse before. The old soldier in him stirred, and with it came a grim calm. Violence was a language he had once spoken fluently. One rider broke through the line, charging toward the cabin. He rose from cover, aimed, and dropped before the horse reached the porch. The woman's face flashed briefly at the window, pale and determined, before vanishing again. He knew she was clutching the boy tight, praying he would not falter. The fight dragged brutal minutes into what felt like hours. Bullets sang through the air, which shattered, earth ripped open. His world narrowed to sights and sounds. The clatter of reloading, the scream of a wounded horse, the hiss of breath between clenched teeth. The goats had vanished into the hills. The hens scattered into silence. The valley itself seemed to hold its breath, watching. Then came the break. 3 riders surged together, forcing him back toward the cabin. He fired, dropped one, but the other 2 pressed close. One reached the porch, boot crashing against the door. He lunged from cover, tackled a man hard into the dirt. Fists replaced rifles, the fight raw and savage. Blood smeared across dust. Teeth cracked. Bones groaned. He fought with desperation sharpened by memory. Every strike an echo of battles he had sworn to leave behind. He won, but not without cost. His side burned where a knife had found him, warm blood soaking through his shirt. The leader advanced at last, dismounting with deliberate calm. He walked as though the fight were already his, rifle slung loose, grin sharp as broken glass. They faced each other in the yard, the world around them littered with the fallen. Silence thick again except for the groans of dying men. The leader spoke low, promising the woman's suffering would be swift if he yielded, promising the boy would be spared. Lies, all of it, the same kind of lies he had once delivered himself. He spat blood into the dirt, raised his rifle, and the fight began. They traded fire, moving through smoke and ruin. The leader shot tore splinters inches from his head, his own answer ripping through the man's coat. They closed distance fast, until rifles fell empty and steel was drawn. The clash of knives rang out harsh, the struggle close, intimate, every breath ragged. Dust and blood blurred the world. 2 men locked in the oldest argument the land had ever known. Who deserved to stand when the sun rose again? At the last, with strength draining, he drove the blade home. The leader staggered, disbelief carving across his face before he crumpled into the dirt. The silence that followed was deep, heavy as stone. He stood over the body, chest heaving, blood dripping from his wounds. The fight had taken more from him than he could afford. His knees buckled, and he staggered back against the fence, sliding down until the world tilted around him. The cabin door flew open. The woman ran to him, the boy at her heels. She pressed her hands against his wound, her face tight with fear and anger all at once. He tried to push her away, to mutter that he had done what needed doing, that she should see the child, but she would not be moved. The boy clutched his arm, wide-eyed, silent, refusing to let go. For a long moment, he let it happen. He let their touch hold him where the land had always left him alone. His past pressed in, the fire and smoke of other raids, the screams he had once ignored. He had been many things, soldier, outlaw, exile, but here, in the wreckage of his farm, with goats scattered and hens pecking nervously at the edge of blood-stained dirt, he felt something else stirring, something close to absolution. The village arrived by midday, drawn by smoke and rumor. They found him wounded but alive, the yard littered with the bodies of men who had threatened them all. No one spoke as they looked at him, not with the same suspicion they once carried. Respect hung uneasy in the air, mingled with awe and the bitter scent of gunpowder. The sheriff knelt, checked the fallen leader, and gave a small nod that meant the danger was done. He rose unsteadily, leaning on the fence, blood soaking through his shirt, but eyes unbroken. The woman supported him, the boy walking close at his side. Together they crossed the yard, past the wreckage, past the stares of villagers who could no longer call him a curse. When the sun sank red over the valley, he stood again in his field. The goats crept back, nervous but alive, the hens clucking as though nothing had changed. The boy walked beside him, holding the same feather he had once given. He took it in his hand, closed his fingers around it, and felt the weight of the day ease, if only slightly. The world had demanded blood, and he had given it. But in return, he had found something he did not expect, a reason to remain standing. The silence of the valley would never be the same again. It carried new voices now, voices he could not turn away from. For the first time in years, he welcomed the sound.